everyone, and welcome to another episode of Small Bites. I'm Dr. Karen McDowell, and today's topic is Be Where You Are. So it's the new year. People are talking about goals, people are talking about resolutions, intention setting, all of the stuff that comes with the new year, which is fantastic. I love any opportunity to reflect and to consider how we might improve our lives. But at the same time, I know this time of year can be really difficult because along with that big goal setting and those resolutions comes a sense of inevitable failure that it's going to be difficult to keep those resolutions or that they're not going to last past the end of the month. A really important thing to think about is when you're setting intentions or when you're setting resolutions or goals, if you're actually setting those goals relative to where you are in your life. So if you are, let's say, a beginner at something and you set this goal to master that thing, you aren't really setting a goal that is relative to where you actually are or where you're actually coming from as you move forward in that goal. So in today's video, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what it means to be a beginner, what it means to kind of move through the stages of learning something, and what it means to be at different stages of growth at different times and in different areas in your life. My hope for you with this video is that you're going to find some tools and some ideas that are going to help you think about what you might want to accomplish in the coming year or the ways you may want to adjust your life to accommodate your goals. And I want to give you tools to think about that, not from I'm going to blow smoke up your ass and we're going to have, all the big ideas and everything, but from a really realistic standpoint, a really solid standpoint, so you feel comfortable moving forward with your goals and you feel like you're going to be able to achieve what you want to achieve this year. As with all Small Bites, you can join us on Wednesday on our Instagram live at 12 noon Central to talk about this topic. We'd love to hear your ideas and thoughts and comments about the video today. And of course, you can find us anywhere on social media and online at thegraciousmind.com. So let's talk about goals. These kinds of goals or these kinds of things that people want to work on can come from all different areas. It might be really tangible things like you want to learn to play the piano or you want to learn a new language. Or they may be kind of less tangible goals, like you want to improve self-care or you want to work on communication, things that might be a little bit more abstract. All of those are great examples of goals or things that you might want to improve on. All of these different ideas, all of these different things, you're at different growth levels, you're at different ability levels on all of these things, and that's fine. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a beginner. If you're starting something, maybe you're starting to learn a new language or you're starting to work on self-insight and self-growth, being a beginner can be really uncomfortable. When it comes to skills that we're working on kind of for the first time, sometimes it's easy to mistake that discomfort for disinterest. So we'll start working on something, let's say you start learning a language or you start playing the piano or you start doing something, and you find that it's uncomfortable because it feels weird to not be good at something and you're like feeling awkward, you're not sure what you're doing. And so then we mistake that for dislike. We think, oh, I don't like that, I'm not into that, without really giving ourselves a chance to like dig into it and really experience it, getting past some of that discomfort. So being a beginner can be really uncomfortable in that way. And in that regard, sometimes that turns into faking care of yourself, where maybe you say, I'm going to start doing self-growth. I'm going to start meditating. I'm going to get good at meditating. And then you start it and it's uncomfortable and you're not good at it. And so you're like, oh, this isn't a fit for me. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to pressure myself because I want to be nice to myself. That's not actually taking care of yourself. That's faking care of yourself. There's another video on our channel that talks about that if you want to know more about that. But that idea of misinterpreting that discomfort or misinterpreting that awkwardness of being a beginner at something for dislike or inability or something like that, that makes you give up on it sooner. So I want you to think about when you're a beginner and you find yourself frustrated or you find yourself struggling to master something, like how are you responding to that frustration or that discomfort? Are you responding by, giving a screaming kid a piece of candy where you're like, okay, discomfort, I'll move away. I won't try it. I won't be a beginner anymore. I'll never be a beginner at anything again. Ooh, that sounds not cool. Or are you like really engaging with it? And you're like, oh, I'm just really struggling. And you're like really like milking those feelings and like not, rather than just being like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm going to ignore it. You do things uncomfortable all the time. Probably you don't really like doing dishes, or probably you don't really like paying bills or doing other things, but you do them and they're not comfortable and you just kind of are like, I hate doing this and I'm going to do it anyway. So apply that to these skills. Like you're being a beginner at something, you're trying to learn something. It's okay to be uncomfortable and still do it. Let's talk about some of the benefits of being a beginner. being a beginner is so good for your brain. When I do testing, sometimes I do neuropsych testing. I test for dementia, things like that. One of the things that I ask people is, when is the last time you were a beginner at something? When is the last time you learned something new or you tried something new? And there's a direct correlation between cognitive decline and lack of cognitive stimulation of trying new things. And so often I prescribe to people, who are in their later years, I'll say, you've got to do something new. You got to be able to pick up an instrument, pick up a language, pick up a skill, a hobby, anything. It doesn't matter, because the brain is plastic, meaning it grows and it changes and it shifts. So when you're a beginner at something, when you're learning something new, you're literally developing new pathways in your brain. And the more pathways you have in your brain, the faster information gets, scooched around. And also the more creative you are, the more innovation, because you have all these different ways you could go in your brain. Being a beginner at something creates new pathways. Your brain loves it. It will keep your brain healthy. It will keep you sharp. You want to have good brain health. You got to be a beginner at things through your whole life. That has to happen. Another benefit of being a beginner is that it increases empathy. Sometimes as we go through life and we master things, early on we master walking, right? We master talking, we master feeding ourselves with a spoon, and we master tying our own shoes. And then we can be a little bit like, that 4-year-old can't tie her own shoes yet, and I'm 5 and I can, right? So we have that being a beginner at things, that youthful snobbery, I think, does translate into adulthood, where we might find ourselves being kind of snide to people that are beginners at things that maybe we're better at. And so being a beginner at some things helps you have empathy for people who are a beginner at other things. So let's say, for example, you've been doing insight work for a long time. You've been going to therapy or watching videos or reading books or doing whatever to work on yourself. And then somebody comes along and they are just starting insight work and they are just getting going with understanding themselves and where they've come from. You may find yourself being farther along on a growth path, feeling annoyed or feeling frustrated or being like, oh, that I'm kind of judgmental or something like that. But if you are a beginner at something else, let's say at that same time you decide you want to learn how to do something else, or you want to improve some other part of your life, it is going to increase your empathy for other people who are working on themselves too, or who are working on their own goals. So being a beginner kind of keeps us humble, right? Like, it keeps us kind and it keeps us empathetic towards others. Another really cool thing about being a beginner is that it lets you focus on joy rather than mastery. So I think about what it's like. Let's say I take a cooking class. And I go, and I've never taken a cooking class before, and I'm so worried about it being absolutely perfect that I don't get to have the fun of being there in the class. But if I can let myself be where I am, I can say I'm a beginner. This may or may not come out good. Who even knows? But it's so fun to be here and play around in it and try and see what happens. By allowing myself to be a beginner, I get to experience joy. If I am a beginner at something and I'm expecting mastery, there's no joy in that. There's nothing but frustration and shame and yuck feelings. So, being a beginner and letting yourself be a beginner can really open a lot of opportunity for joy. And then being a beginner also really empowers you, because you can see growth happen. When you start doing something and you're trudging bit by bit and you're getting better a little bit at a time, if you're holding that idea that you're supposed to have mastered this thing already, then it's going to feel you're going to be like, oh, I'm so behind. I'm not as good as everyone else. It's taking too long. But if you can set that aside and let yourself be a beginner, you're going to see change so fast, because those tiny steps add up. And so you'll start seeing changes if you let yourself see them. You'll start seeing changes and positive benefits. Now let's talk about those middle levels, those kind of intermediate levels where you're not really a beginner at the thing anymore. Again, whether we're talking about a skill, a hobby, anything that you're working on, insight, any of those kinds of things that you're working on. Being in that moderate level can be very uncomfortable, just like with any of the other levels. That can be very uncomfortable. Sometimes when you're in that moderate level, when you're not a beginner anymore, but you're not an expert anymore, it can get it's kind of the nitty gritty of it. It's kind of when you got to push through some of those barriers, some of those longer term barriers. I call it the gravity of the past, like the inertia that just kind of pulls you back to the way that you were. So when you're in the moderate stages, it does take a little bit more kind of personal oomph to keep going in that. You may find when you're kind of moderate or intermediate something that the pace of change slows down a little bit. You're not growing or learning kind of in the leaps and bounds that you were at first, because you're in the kind of in the middle ground. So things kind of slow down. Now, if you're expecting yourself to still be working as fast as you were when you were a beginner, or if you expect yourself to be at mastery, that's not being where you are, and you're going to set yourself up for just feeling like shit later. But in those intermediate grounds, in those middle grounds, recognizing that change is going to come a little bit slower, but it is going to be a lot deeper and more meaningful change. So when it becomes more of a marathon than a sprint, when you are kind of digging in a little bit deeper, you're going to have to tap into some other skills. You're going to have to tap into patience. You're going to have to tap into habit building. You're going to have to tap into that sort of persistence and that motivation piece, which may be a little bit more difficult to maintain. But of course, there are benefits to being in that middle ground and that intermediate ground. One of my favorite benefits about being in that middle ground is what I call kind of bridge learning or bridge growth. And that is where you've done enough and you've grown enough to be able to help someone else or to be able to engage with somebody else that's new, but you're not mastery yet. So you can still benefit from the instruction or coaching or advice or education or whatever from people that are more advanced than you. So it's kind of like a bridge. You get to kind of benefit, learn, and also teach and give. And so again, kind of with this idea of being where you are, if you are in an intermediate stage and you're having trouble maintaining some of that momentum, it may be time for you to connect with people on either side of that bridge and get the benefits of both of those sides while you're in that middle ground. Another benefit of being in the middle ground is that you can look back. You can look back to when you were a beginner and you can say, I did this. I can see the change that happened for me then, and I can be proud of that. And so you have a precedent, kind of. You have basically like, you've already come this far, you can keep going. Now, a lot of times I hear people getting frustrated because they go through the beginning stages, they get to the intermediate stages, and they're mad that intermediate isn't mastery. And I'm sorry that the developmental process works like that, but that's how it works. You do have to be at moderate stages or middle stages, but in those moderate stages, you can look back and see what you've done. In those moderate stages, you're closer to flow, which is that state of mind where you're not really having to exert that much effort to do the thing you're working on. And that's what mastery often looks like, is being able to get into the flow of it and getting really engaged in something. So in the intermediate stages, you may start tasting a little bit of what that flow feels like. And again, with the idea of be where you are, if you taste flow for a moment and then you're like, bah, I can't find it anymore and I'm not finding it, therefore I'm not good at this, therefore this doesn't fit for me anymore, then you're missing it. You're not being where you are. If you're at these moderate stages of growth and you taste a little bit of that flow and you're like, this is yummy, I want more of this, then that can be used as the fuel to keep you going and keep you working on whatever it is you're working on to get you into the mastery level. Also, when you're in the moderate levels, you can start blending skills. So when you're a beginner, you're kind of focusing on like one way of doing it or one idea, or like practicing kind of step-by-step ways of doing it. When you get into more intermediate stages, you might start blending different things. You might be an expert at something else and you start bringing that into to whatever it is you're working on that you're in the moderate ranges on. Or you might, start working on a new thing and bring in some beginning skills from something else to supplement what you're working on. So there's lots of ways that when you start getting your feet under you, you can start blending different levels and different types of skills. So let's talk about the expert range. When you're in the expert range, there are some discomforts with that too. People often think like, oh, if I was just great at this, I would love it and I would feel great about it all the time. But that's not true. That's not real. There are challenges to being an expert at things, just like there are at any of the other levels. So sometimes when you reach the expert level or when you're really, really good at something, you become complacent. You forget to pay attention. You forget to keep improving your skills and kind of keep your skills sharp. And so you can consider yourself a master at something, but not actually be that good at it anymore. So mastery does require a certain amount of upkeep, which can be uncomfortable and frustrating sometimes. Being an expert can be really difficult too if you are surrounded by people who are not an expert in what you're working on. So, at a face value, that might be like, oh, I'm great at playing the piano. And so being around people that don't play the piano as well is difficult for me. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is more like I'm really good at communication. I have a lot of experience and a lot of training and a lot of whatever with communication. Sometimes it's hard to communicate with people that don't have as much training or experience or insight with regard to communication. That can be frustrating. It doesn't mean anyone's wrong or that anyone's bad for being where they are, but it does sometimes make it difficult to connect or difficult to work together with other people. Of course, like I said, if you're working on something else and you're a beginner in some other area, you're probably going to have a lot more empathy for those people. I also think it's a little bit difficult when you're in the expert stages to recognize when you could use some coaching or some teaching and to find those appropriate people. You know, my friend Derek always says, Serena Williams has a coach. Why shouldn't I have a coach? And I think that's a great way to look at it. Even the most expert people at the most awesome things still need coaching, and they still need growth, and they still need learning. So remembering that and keeping on with that, but also finding the right people that can help you, that can be a challenge as well. And of course, there are benefits to being an expert at something. You can find flow way easier. You can tap into that, and that feels really good. But again, you're not going to get to that if you are not first a beginner and then an intermediate. You're not going to make it there. And so this idea, I think, that people have that you can achieve that status of being great at something and feeling good at something without moving through all these other stages, it just feels really terrible, especially if you blame yourself for not being able to do it. Another benefit to being an expert is that it never ends. You can continue to grow. You can continue to try new things, no matter what skill you're talking about. You do not know everything about anything. And so there's always room to grow, always space to stretch, always space to keep pushing. And that's really exciting. Once you've mastered something, you get to play with it. You get to push boundaries. You get to try things you never thought you would try with it. And of course, I mentioned earlier about starting to blend skills. When you move into mastery level, you can blend skills a lot more. You can start being really creative and doing things that nobody's ever thought of, or combining things in ways that are really unusual or exciting. So there's a lot of benefits and a lot of discomforts with being at every stage along the way. But I do find that people want to rush through the first two stages because they just want to be an expert at something. And one, it's not possible. And two, then they feel like shit and they think that it's their fault because they just didn't try hard enough, or they just weren't interested, or their brain isn't cut out for that, or whatever, when really they didn't give themselves a chance to go through the stages. So if you are an adult and you are watching this, I guarantee you that you are an expert at many things. You are probably an expert at getting a glass of water. You are probably an expert at locking your front door. There are a million things you're great at, and more serious things than that. Those are just silly examples. But I also promise you that there are things that you're a beginner at. And I want to invite you, as we finish up this video, I want to invite you to look at those things and consider, what are you a beginner at? And if you're not a beginner at anything, your brain is dying, because you have to be learning new things and you have to be adding stuff to your brain to keep it growing and to keep it moving. So if you don't have anything in your life that you're a beginner at, it's probably because of anxiety. It's probably because it feels so uncomfortable to be a beginner at something that you're not willing to even try that. And that makes perfect sense. It is uncomfortable. But I think that getting over that discomfort, getting through it, and situating yourself to it can bring a lot of benefits to your life. So that's our small bites for this week. If you have questions, again, please join us on Wednesday for Small Bites Live on Instagram at 12 noon Central. You can also find us at thegraciousmind.com and across all social media platforms. And be sure to check out our gift shop on our website. We have some awesome new merch going up, and I'm really excited about it. So we will see you on Instagram Live, and then we'll catch you back here next week for another episode of Small Bites.